I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Hey dude, what's up?
Oh, there you go. Sorry about the time mix up.
No, no stress, man. That's totally fine.
How are you?
I'm great, man. Where are you from? Scotland, right?
Yeah, I live in Scotland. I'm Italian originally, and I've lived in a few places around the world. But I came to study here in like 2016, and I'm still here. So
How do you come across my work?
I first I think on Instagram through some story or link. One click led to the next one, and I found your Anarchy for Freedom page,
Yeah.
and then I found you, and I followed you, and I followed both you on the page. And yeah, I started this podcast in January. So after a few episodes, I thought, you know what, let me send Yohan a message and see if he's willing to have a cool chat about what's happening.
Sure thing, man.
And I was watching your interview with Derek Bros. I haven't
Hmm.
finished it, but very interesting how you got into anarchy. And I also came from the same. I don't know if I don't really describe myself with too many labels, but I thought it was interesting because I also came into this understanding of what's happening from like finance and the way money works and how well it doesn't work really, but and how it affects the whole big picture. So I thought that was a nice little link. I haven't finished it yet, but I'll watch the rest of the interview. But yeah, anyway, how are you? And I thought we'd start by telling us who you are, what you do, and
Sure thing.
how. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm Yohan Tengra. I started my journey of consciously filtering what came into my mind nearly 6 years back when I figured out that I had been scammed in religion. That's what really got me because I didn't have a tradition. Like I myself wasn't like an orthodox religious person or something, but from my family side, there's a lot of pressure to not my parents necessarily, but my grandmom. She was really religious, and I was very close to her, so I kind of came up with a lot of religious beliefs. And I went through like a hard phase in my life where there was a shake-up, relationship issues and stuff, which really didn't sit well with me. So that stimulated me to really start to think about bigger and deeper things in life. And I really started out at that time with a lot of life after death research and near-death experience research, spiritual subjects, and I mean frontier science areas like psychic phenomena, near-death experiences, past life regressions, things like that. So that's where I started my journey of kind of wanting to figure out the truth about consciousness and the soul, and more spiritual esoteric subjects. But once I kind of started exploring that, there are a lot of pages at the time, like 6 years back, that were talking about that stuff, but also started exposing me to research in the terms of like fractional reserve banking and how that's manipulated, just the political system in general, and how the entire military industrial complex works, and how the NATO war machine works to take over countries, and economic hitmen. So I started coming across a lot of stuff like that from pages that were talking about the spiritual side of things as well. So that was my entry into conspiracy research. So I mean, I kind of like started watching documentaries on many different things. I remember it was like Foster Gamble's documentary Thrive that really kind of got me in terms of it really consolidated a lot of these subjects in a very holistic
Sorry, which
format.
one
So
was that? What is it called?
Thrive by Foster Gamble.
Okay.
uh, yeah. So there's a documentary called Thrive. It has like many million hits on YouTube. It's one of the most watched documentaries in the world. But Foster really, I mean, and Foster's work with Derek also. So like even Derek Bros has done like a couple of interviews with him. But he was there for the Greater Reset conference also. But he really has a holistic worldview. That's something that I look up to a lot because he delved into many different subject areas and kind of developed a comprehensive worldview after looking at the evidence from all sides. So that's what I really liked in his documentary, because that was my first exposure to understanding the whole problem and the solution as well, because that was my first exposure to anarchy. So I'll come to that. But that documentary is the first place where I first heard about things like voluntarism, and I mean the idea of taxation being theft and things like that. And Foster had kind of got influenced by people like Rothbard and Mises and Hayek and
Hmm.
people like that. So I got exposed to that from there. But that time I was mainly interested in conspiracies. I didn't really understand, like how what we can do to get out of it. It was just like, okay, all of this is wrong, and I was just kind of obsessed with the fact that I'd been lied to. So I want to investigate and find out what's wrong exactly. So after I got done looking into many subject areas, like after I saw that documentary, I came across other researchers and I started exploring their work, and it just like, one book leads to another, and you kind of read a reference and you want the other book. And so, I mean, I did that for like 3 years and kind of went down the rabbit hole in many different subject areas, including the ET and UFO questions. So I mean, I'm very kind of interested in things that people don't usually get interested in. I mean, now a lot of interest is growing, and even the whole talk of UFO disclosure and stuff is becoming pretty mainstream, which I
Yeah.
think there are the agendas involved there as well. But at the time that I was doing it, it was kind of scoffed upon, and like, I mean, I always made it a point to listen to a lot of skeptics also. So I would watch hours of Dr. like Michael Shermer and people like that, Richard Dawkins, and
People who
typical
disagree.
yeah, like typical
Yeah.
skeptics who just take a very like materialistic, very like hard skeptic, rational mindset towards things. So I saw a lot of flaws in their thinking. Also, I kind of discovered that there's a lot of good science and like really good research being done in the realm of like psychic phenomena, and
Mhm.
this the question of quantum physics and consciousness, the nature
Yeah.
of consciousness. There's a lot of those things have really good research that's gone into them, but they typically, I mean, they say they're open-minded and that they'll change their mind if new evidence comes, but they always keep shifting the goalposts. So I kind of explored that line of thinking also, and in my opinion it has many shortcomings, and I do think that they cut themselves off from the idea that there could be something non-material. Like they've already made up their mind like everything is material and solid,
Yeah.
so it can't exist, it's not possible. That's where they start out with, and I think that's what leads to a lot of their beliefs, and their beliefs kind of seep into debunking conspiracy theories also, which
Yeah.
is what I had seen. Like a lot of skeptics typically use very weak arguments to debunk conspiracies, but I mean, even if you kind of adopt a very hard skeptic mindset towards scientific research, but when it comes to motives and opinions and like people having kind of conflicts of interest and things like that, you can't use that kind of mindset. You have to think about intentions, and circumstantial evidence becomes very important. You can't just go for like when you're
Yeah.
talking about people's intentions and people conspiring, you can't go for you're not going to find hard evidence of people conspiring behind a room. It always happens in secret, right? And that's what conspiracies are about. So you kind of
But
have
not
to now.
always, because a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
the time these things are just wide in the open, which is
yeah, yeah,
amazing. And
I
it's a
know, I
point that I'm sure, as you know, James Corbett makes
know.
a lot of times. It's like these things are not top secret. I mean, some of them might be top secret files only available to a few number of
Yeah,
people, but the vast majority of these things, like for example, as we started the conversation, where does money come from? How does it work? These are things that anyone can find out in a few minutes, you know.
yeah, and
So
Jay Dyer has really good work on this. Like, I mean, just the thing you're talking about this being an open secret. Like, they've told us for years what they're gonna do. Like, if you read Bertrand Russell, Jack Atterley,
yeah,
H.G. Wells, all Aldous Huxley, George Orwell. Like, these people were connected to
yeah,
people in these networks. Like, if you study Huxley and the Fabians, and I mean, like they have connections everywhere. Like all these people that keep coming up. Even Bertrand Russell had connections with Darwin, if I'm not sure, and people like that. So they told us for years like exactly what they want to do, and I mean the same thing keeps coming up in movies and predictive programming. Like, I mean, I really like Jay Dyer's work. I don't know if you've come across him or not, but he's done a lot of good work on exploring symbolism and like
in
New
media
World
and
Order.
movies. Yeah,
Yeah, agendas in film. Vigilant Citizen is a great website that again like does good work on decoding symbolism and like agendas that these people introduce into films to kind of prime the consciousness of people to accept what they're going to do. So we've been told this stuff for years. I mean, people have been called conspiracy nuts and stuff for like decades, but we see, I mean, like if you just pick up any of David Icke's books and you read, like it's like really fine detail. Like he was talking about a cashless society and microchips and all this stuff in the 90s, man. So whatever, I mean, I don't agree with David on everything, but where credit is due, it's due, man. Like he really got a lot of things right in fine detail if you just go and read his earlier books. And David has been spot on as far as it comes to unraveling. I mean, he was talking about Bilderberg and the Round Table
hmm
and all this stuff that we kind of know about now, going back to the 90s in great detail in his books. I mean, so whether, I mean, many people disagree with him when it comes to the reptilian question, or even like right now, my biggest disagreement with him is about the virus itself, because like, I mean, he's of the opinion that it doesn't exist, and I know many people in our community as well take that opinion
yeah.
that
I've
it
seen
doesn't.
that quite a few times.
Yeah, but I don't hold that opinion specifically. I tend to be in the middle of the germ theory and terrain theory kind of debate, and I have a more nuanced like middle ground opinion on that. Where I do think that viruses and microbes matter, but the host factors are what are more important in that. So yeah, I mean, like whether or not people, like, you don't have to agree with someone on everything, like,
Yeah,
to
of
kind of
course.
respect their work or something like that. So I pick and choose, like, I have disagreements with many people in different things, but that's what,
And
like,
that's a good
independent
thing.
yeah, that's what it's all about. Like, we should be have I see this a lot in our community, where people just like go from podcast to podcast or listen to, and then they just like absorb what they're saying and they go and repeat it instead of
Yeah,
actually
instead of thinking.
searching. Yeah, instead of thinking for themselves and questioning what they're seeing also. And that holds true for anyone who's watching this as well. Like, you should be doing that for everything I'm saying also. That's what we want to encourage, right? We want people to start thinking. We don't want them to just like stop listening to the authority, start listening to us. That's not
Yeah,
going to solve the
exactly. And it can be difficult because, as I'm sure you feel this way, it feels like we're up against this giant that we are at a disadvantage, basically, in a way.
yeah,
And it feels that when you see, as you mentioned, things about the virus not existing, when you see those things and you want to call these things out, not the person that made the statement, but just the
yeah,
statement they made, and you feel hesitant because you feel like you're up against this big machine, by calling something out that you think is not true, you're like breaking the ranks of your own group.
yeah,
So that's a
yeah.
difficult thing that I often find, that, as you said, in our community, there's some things
I've seen
floated.
a lot, man. I've
Yeah,
seen a lot. Like, I've seen this come up with the flat Earth question. I've seen this come up with diet. So veganism is very divisive. The virus question right now is very divisive. The idea of Jews running the world is very
yeah,
divisive. So I mean, there's these there are these few topics that really split the community apart. But I think that we need to be kind of accommodative with people's beliefs, and I think it comes down to the end goal, right? So let's say, even if like someone doesn't believe in the virus and I believe in the virus, right? There are what's the end outcome? Like, I don't want lockdowns, he doesn't want lockdowns. I don't want to wear masks, he doesn't want to wear masks. I don't want to take the vaccine, he doesn't want to take the vaccine. Like, what's the point? Like, what is the disagreement about? How does it even matter practically?
yeah,
When we're looking for something and both sides agree, like even the flat earth question, like nothing's we can't do anything about that. It's just a change in worldview. Like, even if the earth is flat, it's just a change in worldview that would take place, not necessarily in terms of like practical outcomes and in terms of the political system, or in terms of like oppression or the restriction
yeah.
of rights or liberties. There's nothing being affected there. So I mean, even the question of who's really running the world, I mean, from my understanding of power structures and the power of the belief in authority, it doesn't matter who's really running the world. It matters like what position of power, like, we are all looking up to, which has authority, and anyone who comes and controls that is going to dictate people's lives. So whether it's the reptilians, or whether it's just human people behind the curtain, or whether it's even like just people like Kissinger, and it ends there and it doesn't go anything above that, it doesn't really matter. What matters is like those people wouldn't have the authority to do anything if we didn't believe in this
System,
governmental
yeah.
system, and like laws, and like people's diktats that come down as laws and things. These people wouldn't have any power. They have power because they've convinced us that political authority is legitimate, and that we have an obligation to obey the commands that they pass down.
They
That's
give,
that's why
yeah.
we have our problems. Yeah. So I think a lot of these things are moot questions. Like, it's interesting for I mean, for my own. I mean, like, these questions are very important to me personally. But when I'm doing my work, I don't think that these questions really impact the state of freedom or slavery that we have on the planet. Like, there are much more important things to go for that can make us, like, help us to make progress in those areas. And I don't think that some of these other issues are part of that, including the question of who really runs the world, or including the question of the virus exists, doesn't exist, or what the shape of the planet is. I don't see that impacting on what we can do to take our rights back. That's the most important thing to me. Once we have them back, we can have these debates like every day.
Yeah,
That will be fun. But like, until that time, we all need to stick together and really do our best to make sure that our side is not divided.
yeah.
And and I see a lot of this coming from people who tend to have like zealot type of ideologies, because they see anything that they don't agree with. If there is someone listening to this podcast and like they're really sort of hardly believing in Kaufman or Cowan or people like that, who really strongly advocate the fact that the virus doesn't exist, they just start seeing you as like controlled opposition or being a shell or something, and they
Yeah,
just because like if this is true and you're saying it's not, then you're wrong. So I
yeah,
don't need to listen to you. That's the kind of mindset, and I think that mindset, it forms echo chambers. It has a lot of confirmation bias built into it. You don't really, like, you already made up your mind, and that's the same thing comes with any kind of hard belief system. If people have, which is unmovable, you say anything that contradicts that, they just tend to throw you out. Whereas I listen to a lot of people who I don't agree with on some things. It doesn't mean you just throw them out. Like, people can be wrong on some things. People can be spot on when it comes to certain things. So you have to kind of use your discernment and pick and choose. Like
And improves
no
your
one,
own
no one,
thinking.
no one's gonna have the whole picture. Like no one person is gonna have everything. Like
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's a very faulty mindset. A lot of people fall for it.
Yeah, and it improves your own thinking because if you're only listening to things you agree with, once an argument comes that you haven't seen before, you're like, oh my God, and let me go to the guy I listened to so he can tell me what I think. But by listening to people we disagree with, which I think is such a big advantage we have, one of the few advantages we have is that we're bombarded all the time by mainstream media. So we know what the average person that watches that is thinking, at least.
Yeah.
And even within our own community, as you said, there's people with all sorts of different beliefs, and we should see it in a way. Obviously sometimes it can be bad, but we should, as you said, see it as almost a good thing, because we can, open up our broaden up our understandings and be faced with things we disagree with. Because often when I hear something I disagree with in a podcast, I actually start thinking, okay, does this make sense? And it's something I've learned. It's almost automatic now, but it's something I've had to learn the kind of the hard way, to open myself up to disagreement. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, because sometimes there's a few questions that you're like, oh, I really don't want to deal with that, because I know it's going to poke at my foundational beliefs. And that's not nice when someone pokes right there at the things you don't want to let go of in terms of our beliefs. But it's ultimately, we need to be open-minded and be able to have these discussions in an open way.
I think we need to have a mindset where we should be willing to move as soon as we come across evidence that shifts that. So instead of, I used to have this first, like I kind of associated my identity with beliefs, but there was a evolution in my, I mean, since I've been kind of doing this for 6 years, it's been quite a long life like sort of time span for me to be able to shift my perspectives on certain things and the way I think about certain things. So I mean, there's a natural kind of progression towards me opening up to wider and wider bodies of knowledge, which like made it really like hit it in my conscience that, dude, you don't know everything. Like
Yeah.
you know a very tiny aspect of what is there to know. So there's that humbleness automatically sets in. Like that if something new does come up, I want to listen to it. I want to like incorporate that into my worldview. I want to be able to dismiss it if it's not true, right? So that's what I'm on the lookout for. So as soon as I change that mindset, I stop being attached to beliefs. Like even if at this point, like someone comes up with the evidence that vaccines are safe and effective, and like it's true, I will change that. Like it doesn't like, it might sound a little bit like I might sound full of myself when I say that, but I have kind of gained that ability, and which is why I was able to change my views on the virus also. So if you see on my channel last year, I made a video on Kaufman and supporting him and exosomes and all, but it's like I went deeper and deeper into that. I heard different opinions, and like I mean, as time went on, I got to learn more about viral isolation and like things like that. That I mean, they assume a lot of knowledge. I would just put it like, after exploring
Yeah.
that whole debate, I think people assume a lot of knowledge that there's really a good amount of material on if they want to like put themselves into it. Like just for example, like the question of genome sequencing. Like I hear people talk about it and they just talk as if like these people are just making up like genetic sequences and it's all computer generated and they're not finding anything. I went into like the genome sequencing rabbit hole, and there are a whole host of technologies where like every single technology is actually finding like every single nucleotide and they're not making anything up. The algorithms are just used to piece everything together, and even for like better genome sequencing techniques, they don't have to use a lot of that anyway. So it's things like that. I mean, like people really haven't bothered to sort of actually go and investigate, and people just tend to settle for opinion leaders or figures that get formed after a following forms around them, and just go around repeating that. So I think that's a shortcoming, but I think it's also a factor of more like new people coming into the space.
Yeah.
Because I remember I used to think like that when I just got into it, because I was
Yeah.
full of paranoia, and you're shifting worldviews, right? You're coming from a worldview where everything's normal, you're totally programmed into the mainstream kind of belief of everything, and then you start to shift that. So I think that as people get more seasoned as researchers and as more time
It's like a
passes,
learning curve almost.
yeah, these
Yeah.
things automatically get better the more debates you have. I mean, even when you're having a debate initially, you'll kind of have a lot of flaws in your thinking, but I mean, the more and more that goes on, I think it gets better with time. At least that's what I saw in my own case. Like, because I see myself in a lot of people who are really paranoid now, like as when I started out. So yeah,
Yeah.
more time kind of I think helps the situation a lot.
Yeah. So right now, where are you most of your efforts directed towards? Is it your YouTube? I know you do work with I Thrive, and
Yeah.
do you want to tell us a bit about that and what you do there?
Yeah, so I'm very interested in functional medicine. So I really got passionate about it since I started with veganism. Like that's what I started with like 4 years back, and I went down the whole vegan rabbit hole, and it didn't really work for me personally. But I still hadn't formed my views on veganism. But just like going into veganism, doing whole food, plant-based, organic veganism for a year, and seeing the effects it had on me, it was good initially, but then it kind of didn't land up working out. So I came across so much contradictory information on diet and nutrition itself that at one point I was like, shit, I just don't know what to believe, man. I'm gonna leave this. I'm just gonna go back to eating normally. So I did that, and then again I kind of that passion for truth in that space rekindled, and I just realized that it's so much that it's gonna take a long time, but I want to get started out on kind of figuring out what's really going on there. So I started again, and then I kind of started following Dr. Mercola a lot. So he
Okay.
got me like, I mean, he became a kind of role model for me when it came to the health space, and he's someone I really respect a lot right now as well because of all the great work he's done over the years, and the number of papers that guy reads is very fascinating. Like he reads a lot of scientific papers and summarizes that knowledge in very easy words for people to understand, and he has like one of the most visited natural health websites in the world. So I started listening to him a lot, and then I came across like a lot of people into functional medicine, like people like Rhonda Patrick and James J. Nicol Antonio, like a lot of people like that who really have a good understanding of like sort of physiology and biochemistry and things like that, but they also understand the importance of like lifestyle and diet and stress management, sleep, and all those things on actually being able to improve our health. So that was a rabbit hole that I got started. And when my dad got like an autoimmune condition in the family, and I saw my grandmother expire also from dialysis and like kidney damage, that's when I really wanted to take control of my health in my own hands, because I had like health issues of my own in the past. I had like constant chronic inflammation going on in my body. I had many issues like skin issues and scalp issues and things like that. So I wanted to do my best to kind of fix that and resolve that. So that's and of course I got scared looking at what happened in my family, and I didn't want to land up like that, being dependent on the pharmaceutical industry and the
Yeah.
hospital system. So that's when I really started my deep dive into mastering my own health, and that led to me eventually doing a scholarship program from a functional medicine doctor in America. His name is Brian Walsh. So I studied under him for a year, and like taking all of that knowledge, I'm currently pursuing my master's in nutrition science. I want to do a PhD eventually, but like I really am like have a big foot in the health space and being able
Yeah.
to kind of
I just
teaching
want to
people.
ask, how do you define functional medicine actually?
It's basically like root cause medicine. We use the best of both worlds. So we use the best of knowledge that allopathy has traditionally in terms of diagnosis. So we have a lot of research on blood chemistry and like sort of interpretation of biomarkers and optimum ranges for biomarkers, and we use a lot of advanced testing also. So we are kind of pioneering this in India, because a lot of people in the West, they have access to like organic acids testing and gut microbiome sequencing
Hmm.
and like a lot of those kind of tests. So we are helping to bring all of that into India, because that ecosystem is really nascent out here. People who even think about alternative medicine in India typically tend to go for naturopathy or Ayurveda or homeopathy, but functional medicine is kind of something people have never heard about. So
Okay.
what we basically do even in our practice is like the knowledge base that I gather after studying under Walsh, and even like my other research that cuts into just nutrition science, I figured out that a lot of the blood chemistry interpretation that's happening is very flawed, because they're using reference ranges that are based on the health of the general population, which is very sick. So in the scientific literature, there are like optimum reference ranges. There are really good studies that look at optimum reference ranges for healthy people, and we're basically just taking that knowledge in order to figure out functional ranges for the many markers. So I mean things like even CRP, fasting glucose, GGT. I mean, like, I don't know if people have heard of a lot of these markers, but many of these are being used for COVID also right now. So we basically like use the best knowledge that we have in the scientific field when it comes to interpreting blood chemistry. And there's a lot that simple blood chemistry can tell you if you know how to read it, right? So we take that, we take a look, we figure out what's exactly going on, and we have advanced tests. Like if someone has gut issues, and if we can't get a basic idea with basic blood chemistry, then we'll go for like a gut GI effects, or so like a GI map or something that's done abroad. If someone has like more complex issues related to fungal infections or bacterial infections or things like that, you'll tend to order an organic acids for them. So it's really about figuring out what exactly is wrong with the person, And then, I mean, strategies that we do to fix it involve like fixing leaky gut. That's at the center of many chronic diseases. Basically like light therapy, so infrared sauna use and photobiomodulation, and like there's a lot of things that we can use. Like we practice evidence-based detoxification also. So there's a science behind activating detoxification pathways and incorporating that with fasting and like using binders and everything. So there's a lot of knowledge that I learned, like going really deep into nutrition science, that I'm basically using in order to help people out here. So functional medicine in a nutshell really involves like root cause analysis. You tend to
Yeah,
figure out exactly like what is causing someone's issue, and then you fix that using like many strategies that we have available. This involves nutraceuticals also, and elimination diets. So people who have like autoimmune issues, or who have like things where the immune system is getting triggered, there are
yeah,
certain foods that are doing that. So eliminating those and figuring out which those are really helps people a lot. So
that's very
some people can
interesting.
have problems with
Yeah,
mold, like you have tend to have mold growing in your house. Some people have sensitivity to EMFs. Some people have sensitivity to different like toxins in food, like things like oxalates or lectins and things like that. So there's a lot of knowledge in that space that can be used to really help people, and without ever popping a pill in your life, like you can really figure out what
yeah.
deficiencies you have and what you need to fix in that space.
I want to ask you: are you familiar with Brett Weinstein?
No, I'm not. I've never heard of him.
He's an evolutionary biologist from America, and he's recently had. Do you know Pierre Corey? He
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
he talks
I just heard
about
of her, yeah, yesterday actually.
benefits of ivermectin and all that.
Oh, yeah,
And
that's kind of synchronistic. I just met law. Have you heard of the lawsuit, the this thing, the notice that went from Indian lawyers to Soumya Swaminathan and the WHO? That
to
just
the
went
is
like
that the Indian doctor, the WHO, the woman? Uh, is it
Soumya
lawsuit against?
Swaminathan.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
I've
yeah, yeah,
seen
yeah.
something about that. Yeah.
I just met those lawyers yesterday.
Oh,
We're gonna,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll ask you about that in a second because I wanted to say. So Brett Weinstein, he's at Pierre Corey on his podcast, and they've been doing a lot of. I'll send you a link because it was really good conversation. And Pierre Corey made the point that he's in his 50s now, but he made the point that doctors and medicine, the way he understands it or used to understand it before this era happened, was a lot about like intuition and understanding how patients individually feel. And he gave the example that at the beginning, when he was a young doctor, he was a bit lost, but after a while, he could walk into a room and almost immediately sense, based on a few things, what was wrong with someone. And it seems like this seems like a big contrast, and when you're talking about functional medicine, it reminds me of this approach, this very sort of, go to the person, maybe use your intuition, but you have all these tools that you can use. And it feels like a complete opposite to what's happening now with WHO and like this top down way that things are being communicated from this sort of authority, the World Health Organization, literally. And just wondering if you have any thoughts on that and how it relates to like what's happening now with the vaccine and the idea that we need to inject ourselves with these chemicals to defend ourselves against this virus, which feels like a part of a bigger thing about just the opposite of what you're talking about, basically, and all the way that we live our lives today and how it damages us. So I was just wondering if you have any comments on that and
Yeah, I
if you
mean,
agree.
like when we study, I totally agree with you, man. When we study economics, we see that the market like really works efficiently in all these areas, and centralization is always bad. Like
Mhm.
because of the knowledge problem itself. Like
Yeah, yeah,
if you hand everything to a few bureaucrats, they're gonna know a lot less than if you decentralize that into different stakeholders, and they're using their own knowledge bases and things that are unique to their area in order to solve that person's problem. So one size fits all approach is never going to work. This is why socialism doesn't work either, and centralization of like state-owned management of resources and all, it doesn't work, man. So the same thing applies to this space as well. If you're going to have like one authority that's going to dictate like, okay, throughout the world, like this is supposed to happen and you should be doing this, that's obviously going to land up in a disaster. And I think what we're seeing right now with the COVID crisis is really an exaggeration and a weaponized version of germ theory. I believe in germ theory in the sense I don't believe in germ theory like in the way that it's currently understood, but I do acknowledge that microbes have an impact on health. But what the mainstream does is that they totally ignore the host factors. They totally ignore the things that are in our control that influence our sort of risk of manifesting symptoms and how severe those symptoms are if we contract the pathogen. and they totally ignore that. And they basically, I
Yeah.
mean, this is why you keep hearing things like you can't boost your immune system, it's a conspiracy theory. And it's total nonsense, man. Like there's so much science on this available now, on things like vitamin D, on selenium, on B vitamins, and acetylcysteine. There's so many nutraceuticals that can help with COVID-19. So that's just
Yeah.
totally wrong. So they ignore that and they just focus on the micro. And then it's like it's all about, okay, a new microbes come, so we need to run away from it, we need to hide as long as possible until the vaccine's out, and the vaccine is the only thing that can solve the problem. So I did a very good podcast with Jeremy Hammond on this. He's a great investigative journalist who I have a lot of respect for, and we did a nearly 3 hour podcast where we really went into like all the debate between the virus deniers and the people who acknowledge the
Yeah.
existence of the virus. And it's kind of like a Republican Democrat thing. Like I mean, both sides don't have truth in it, because one side is totally denying the existence of viruses and the impact on health. The other side is just totally denying the existence of any other factors. I'm like, why can't it be both? Like why can't you have like a little bit of both going on? So that's my opinion on the subject, and that's why I think that the vaccinations are really not about health. And this whole thing, even though I acknowledge the existence of the virus, none of the things they've done have actually solved the problem. In fact, they've made it 10 times worse. Like the masking, the lockdown, the social distancing, everything, like none of that has actually helped the situation. And we have like 2 years of science now to tell us that. There have been like a lot of papers published on lockdowns and the damage they've done, and like, whether they're even effective or not. And there's no correlation between lockdowns and, a case or death
And
curves or
yeah.
anything like that. Yeah, they've seen the same thing with mass studies also. We have randomized control trials showing us that. We have epidemiology studies that where they look at many countries, there's no association between case and death figures and curves, and the mask mandates that have happened. What these people do is they use, like, this is really fascinating to see. All the skeptics who typically tend to use the arguments that correlation is not causation and you can't cherry pick data and all, you see them using the exact same thing right now. So when you look at the mask studies, I heard this debate between Danny Rancourt and this baboon of a guy from some Psychology Today. Okay, if you just like, it's hilarious. It's like you should watch that debate on masks. It happened last year. Even Off Guardian featured that. And I mean, like, their whole argument comes down to mechanistic explanations and, like, cherry picking epidemiology. And they just ignore, like, what typically they would use. Like, if you typically talk to a skeptic, they would tell you, yeah, we need randomized control trials, so that controls for the bias. You need placebos being used. Like, all of that has just gone from the window when it comes to mask science or vaccine science or lockdown science. They just assume these things work and they work their way backwards. So all the evidence for masks is similar. Like, they'll cherry pick one country. They'll say, oh, look here, we implemented the mask and the cases went down. But
Yeah.
that's not science, man. Like, you're just like observing something happening. If you want to prove cause and effect, you have to do trials and actually show that. And none of the control trials with lab confirmed endpoints show us that like masks do anything to reduce transmission. So I mean, like, this is not just in the realm of like conspiracy and like questioning people's motives. Of course, like, we have all of that evidence also, but just on a very, very like purely scientific basis, a lot of this stuff has been proved to be wrong now.
Yeah.
Just, I mean, from a very, very academic mindset. Like, if you look at the work of people like Jay Bhattacharya and Sunitra Gupta and like the whole Great Barrington Declaration crowd, and a lot of people who are writing for the Panda Network and all, they've done fantastic work in like really breaking the science behind things like the testing fraud, the variant thing. Like, Mike Eden has written some
Yeah.
great articles on the variants as well. So there's a sound like scientific opposition to what's going on. And if you see how the mainstream
Actually
media
scientific.
yes,
Actually, yeah.
and then they just portray it as if like, no, like these people are basically advocating like do nothing, let people die. That's how they kind of misrepresent the arguments that
And they use
phys-
fact checkers funded by the pharmaceutical companies and Facebook in order to
exactly.
dismiss.
Yeah, and this is
And
why I like Jeremy Hammond's work a lot, because he kind of like takes a deep dive and he fact checks the fact checkers. So
yeah.
the fact checkers have a typical tactic. Like, they'll usually go for they'll misrepresent the argument. Like, they'll not address what the person's actually saying. They'll use the weakest form of evidence. So even if there's a paper that actually talks about a claim they're addressing, they're like a scientific paper, they will not use that in the article. They'll use some random Facebook post. Like, I don't know if you've seen these fact checks. Many times
Yeah,
they
yeah.
address Facebook post of some guy with a meme or something like that, and then they go to debunk that. They don't actually address the actual claim. So that this, like, they use a lot of manipulation and that so-called fact checking also to apparently fact check these things. But like, you can easily show them, like, that's the problem with a fact check. Like, who decides that I'm right and okay, I've fact checked you, so you're wrong? Like, things are always debatable even if someone's like fact checked you, you can still like dismiss that and give your counter
Well, that's the
explanation. So
spirit of science.
yeah,
Science
exactly.
is science is all about being a healthy skeptic.
Yeah,
There's
and
no
that's
such a
the exact
thing.
thing that
Yeah,
they're denying that, right? They're basically saying like, look, we fact checked this. This is wrong now. You don't need to worry about this, right?
yeah.
So I mean, they're
There's no
claiming to
such
be
thing as
the final
settled. Yeah,
authority in the truth of the matter, which is not scientific at all.
exactly. There's no such thing as settled science.
Yeah, yeah.
Like science is always changing, and you think we would have learned this by now, but apparently not. Anyway, I wanted to ask specifically about what's happening with COVID, where we're at now, because as you might have heard, here in the UK, the lockdown got extended by 4 weeks, 4 weeks to flatten the curve. And of course, the justification they use is this Indian variant, Delta variant. And already in April, when they started talking about this, I made a podcast episode titled "Don't Fall for the India Propaganda." And so I just wanted to get your opinion on this, on the way the news is here in the West or in the UK specifically is portrayed, about what's happening where you are, and just your thoughts on that and what's actually happening where you are. Where are you, by the way, in India?
I live in Mumbai,
Mumbai.
the
Okay.
financial capital. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, so I mean, like, there's a whole lot to talk about that. Basically, what they did with the second wave is a lot of manipulation in terms of psychology and less to do with actually what happened. I think, from my opinion of what sort of happened right now, at the time the second wave took place, there was genuinely a shortage in like in beds. Like, I know people personally from my group in Mumbai who called me like saying that my relative needs a bed and they're not getting one. So it's not like it was a total hoax or like there's no
Mhm.
problem, and it wasn't like that. There's definitely a problem, and I went on the iconic show also to discuss this, where I kind of spoke about like what's happening. So basically, what happened is that until the vaccine rollout started, there really was no problem. Until December, like things were just fine. The cases had kind of started dropping since like August or September. Like at least in August, the cases already started declining, and like, things were all like basically just going to zero, and everything was opening up, and like we were having massive parties. Like I went for a couple of parties in December, and like even in February in Goa, which is like kind of the party hub of India, and everything's open, and like thousands of people are dancing together, and like there's no issue at all. And suddenly, like like after the vaccine rollout started and it started intensifying, you saw this like case and death curve start to pick up, and a lot of mortality did follow in the wake. So I think the vaccine damage is really underestimated, because at least in the West we have like I mean, the VAERS system itself has its problems, and it kind of
Mhm.
underestimates how many vaccine
Yeah.
adverse events are happening. But the Indian one is even worse. So if in America, on a population of say 200 300 million, you have around 4,000 deaths, 4,500, 5,000. I think that the figures are around 5,000 now, deaths that have taken place in
And that's
India. Like,
underreported in theory.
exactly. So
Yeah.
so do you think in a population where we vaccinated almost 18 crore people, okay, and from that big figure to just find 180 deaths, do you do you think that makes any sense whatsoever? So this is what's happened, because in India, the problem's been like, I've researched this deeply, and I'm involved in a lawsuit as well that we've kind of filed against the central government in our Supreme Court. So I've been involved in the research behind that. So what we found is that there's a systematic suppression of the deaths that have taken place, because they've really propagandized people so well into believing the vaccines are safe and effective, that even when deaths are happening, okay, I know so many people who just think the vaccine doesn't have anything to do with it. It's just something else, like it's just some issue they had from before that came
Coincidence.
up
Yeah.
again. Yeah. So because they've brainwashed people into believing the vaccines are really safe and effective, people don't question them, even if deaths are happening. Let's say I mean, there's a segment of the population that is awake out here to the vaccine fraud, but that's, I mean, that's not in the majority, nowhere near the majority. For these people who do acknowledge, and who, so firstly, they wouldn't take the vaccine. Most of the people who've taken the vaccine are the people who believe that the vaccines are
Yeah.
safe and effective.
Yeah.
So I mean, and even those people who, let's say something happens and they kind of get hesitant that okay, maybe the vaccine had something to do with it, they don't know there's a reporting system. So it's like that reporting system is not advertised. So it's not like VAERS, like someone can just go log on and like file their complaint. For in India, for someone to report a vaccine injury, they have to go to the center where they got vaccinated. They have
Physically.
to know, yeah, they have to go
Yeah.
physically out there, and they have to tell the people that, like, I got vaccinated on this date, and after 5 days or 10 days or whatever, this person died or had a serious injury. And then it's the total discretion of the person sitting there to take it or not. We've literally done sting operations. Okay, like there's a state in India called Gujarat. So we have people out there. One of the families, they went to the place. Someone's died a couple of days after getting vaccinated. Really sad story. I know those people, and they went to like file a complaint and report it, and they didn't take it. They're like, no, it didn't happen. They came back home. They spoke to us. We told them, like, take the, we didn't tell them take the guideline that we told them the second time, but they went the second time after speaking to us, and we gave them more conviction that no, they have to take it, and this is in the guidelines and all that. So they went there, and the second time also they didn't take it, but the second time we got it on tape. Like, they took a, like, kind of
Yeah.
secretly took a video in the pocket and all. So this is what we used, like, in our case as well, in the court, that, even when people are going, even if people know that something's happened and they're going, they're not taking the request. Many of them aren't. Like, in some states it's easier, some states, people are going and they're taking it, some states they're not taking it. So it kind of comes down to, like, the individual who's taking it and his whims and fancies of what he believes as to where something is possible or not possible. Even if the death does go and get lodged, it doesn't mean that the vaccine caused it, right? Then it goes to, like, this national committee where they sit and they have a causality assessment mechanism through which they will decide if something's happened from the vaccine or not. And that was totally rigged by the vaccine manufacturer. So the causality assessment criteria that they use in the country, uh, it's they basically abandoned something called the Brighton criteria that they used to use before, that had a possible and probable category. So the possible probable basically made it ensure that even if you suspected, like, if it's possibly from the vaccine or probably from the vaccine, that has to do with, like, the time distance between the vaccine and, like, when the person had injury, or whether he had any pre-existing condition or not. Like, considering all those factors, you would get a possibility or probability index, and then you could say, like, okay, the vaccine possibly caused it or probably caused it. For when you're trying to determine individual causality for someone, you can't say for 100% certain, because there's always a chance that it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
that. So you have, like, you have a grade, like, you have likely, very likely, possible, probable. So that used to exist before, but ever since they changed this criteria, they removed possible, probable, and they made it consistent causal association or inconsistent. Like, they basically just made it these main two categories, or totally coincidental. So because of these new guidelines and the criteria that they use to assign causality, if deaths haven't been observed in the phase 3 trials, okay, like, if an increase in deaths hasn't been observed in the phase 3 trials, any death happening after the vaccine has started, which is not from anaphylaxis, like, if a death is from anaphylaxis or
Hmm.
like an allergic reaction, they will acknowledge that.
Okay.
But anything other than that, any death other than that is automatically a coincidence. Like, that's according to the guidelines. So even if, like, the person, let's say the person knows that he's got injured from a vaccine, he goes there and his report does get accepted, even after that, like, any death other than an anaphylactic reaction or like an allergic reaction will not be counted as a vaccine death, simply because if the vaccine was causing it, they would have seen it in the trials. That's what they assume. So
We would
like,
have seen it. Of course, you would have
yeah,
caught
yeah.
this. And
Yeah, and I
so
mean,
does
there are other
this?
reasons
Yeah.
why they don't see it in the trials. That I mean, this whole segment will become about the vaccine if we just start to go into these issues. But I know, like, we want to discuss other things also. So yeah, there are many issues like that that are basically led to an underreporting, and like, people's perception of how much damage the vaccine is actually doing. So because of that, the second wave, a lot of the deaths were actually happening because of the vaccine, but because of these issues I discussed, people don't make the connection because it doesn't show up in the media because of all the things I just told you. But on paper, like in the news reports, we've been collecting like, reports that have come out, and the count has now reached around 2,200 people. So
Okay.
according to the news reports that we've been collecting from papers, we have around 2,200 deaths that have happened in the country, and of course that's grossly underreported because of the issues I told you about. But yeah, I
It's
mean, that's
yeah.
that's the that's the figure.
It's very disconcerting because a lot. I mean, of course, I'm talking about anecdotal evidence, but and I don't even go out of my way to look for it. I don't really Google adverse reactions to the vaccine. That's mostly through my Twitter, Instagram, but there's just way too much stuff happening for these to be coincidences. I've seen a basketball player the other day had a cerebral hemorrhage in Germany. There's like every day there is on my Twitter feed at least someone that knows someone that had a super. And again, this is anecdotal, yes,
But you
but
see, there's a problem with that mindset, man. Like, even I of course agree with you when you're saying it's anecdotal, but we need to be really street smart, like with the way we look at this, because
Yeah, yeah,
the evidence that we need that would show us that it's causally causing it, they're not fucking doing it. Like they
yeah,
don't do that. So
yeah,
they don't do that, and they just leave you with anecdote. So
yeah.
it's like you have to make something of it, right? I mean, like, if you want to fund a study yourself, it's going to cost you millions of dollars. They are of course not going to do it. They don't do the studies in the correct way. Like, even the trials have so many issues. And I mean, to be honest, the phase C trials have not been completed. Like, they're
No,
going to
no, of
take a long
course.
time to get completed, and they've removed the control groups. So even for Pfizer and Moderna, the groups that, like, did actually use placebo controls, they removed the placebo control. Now the people who, like, in the control group can also go and take the vaccine because they approved it for emergency use. So they've literally taken the whole control group out. So both groups have now got the vaccine, and you're not going to know anything about
I
what's
mean,
going to
that's
happen long term.
criminal.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
criminal. And it's, I mean, it's so much there. It's
And they
incredible.
spend millions of dollars doing these phase C trials. They cost a lot of money because they're looking at 25,000 people. And then, like, there's so much that you can get from there, but because of these issues that I just spoke about, they've removed the entire control group. So you don't know what's going to happen to people, like, after a couple of months after
Yeah.
they've got
And long term, I
vaccinated.
was thinking, and this is something that worries me so much, because part of the thing that comforted me before was, okay, you know what? I'm not taking this, but for sure in the medium long term, we're gonna be seeing the real effects. And that gave me a sense of like, okay, at least someone's gonna be accountable. But then I realized these pharmaceutical companies, first of all, they're immune from liability. So there's that issue. Second of all, they have armies of billion-dollar lawyers that are easily going to be able to, if there's a long-term effects that someone believes that was caused by the vaccine, they're easily going to be able to go, oh, you eat this, you do that, you don't. They're going to be able to point at all sorts of other things and be like, oh, that's why you got cancer, that's why you this is happening to you, it's not our product's fault. And this
But
is something, yeah,
they're not going to have any control group. So I'm not talking
yeah,
about the control group in the trials, but even in the population, this thing,
yeah,
because they're rolling out vaccine passports, and like they're literally coercing many, like, large swathes of people to get vaccinated. When they're looking back retrospectively, they do these epidemiology studies where they follow vaccinated versus unvaccinated, and they try to see if long term what happened. So you're not going to be able to do any of those unless, like, our community really gets large and we manage to, like, refuse the vaccine successfully. Even someone looking 5 years down the line is not going to be able to make those comparisons, because they would have totally removed the, like, unvaccinated people, because they're literally forcing everyone around the planet to get vaccinated. So we won't know. And right over there, like, the pharmaceutical companies at that time, if they succeed, uh, they're going to be easily able to prove in court that it's not from the vaccine, because, like, how do you prove that? You don't have a
yeah.
control group to prove that, right?
It's incredible. So here I have a question for you. So do you think that this, what's happening right now, do you think it's mostly about the vaccines themselves? And of course, there's a whole profit motive. There's like 9 or 10 new big pharma billionaires just last year because of this. So do you think it's mostly about money, power, or do you think that the end game really is vaccine passports, and that really is the new step? Because I think it's more about, I don't think, I'm not sold yet on the idea that many people have espoused, including Mike Heaton, I think, that this is a way to just kill a lot of people. I don't buy that just yet. I'm not there. I think it's more about the implication of needing, as many people have argued, oh, we're going to need vaccine passport verification, which is going to give rise to this biosecurity paradigm and everything, QR codes, health, this idea of people being primarily germ spreaders, which is a very dangerous idea. It's incredible how easily within 1 year this is the standard of what people believe. And so what do you think? Do you think it's mostly about the passports and the implications of that, or actually this is some big plan to cull the population and get rid of old people? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have really strong opinions about that, actually. So before the COVID pandemic started, I've studied eugenics a lot, and I really took a deep look at what these families did, like in the 20th century, early 20th century, with the rise of the eugenics movement. And I studied that in great detail because I wanted to apply that as to, like, what's going on in India.
Mm-hmm.
So I studied the history of the Rockefellers and the Harrimans and all these people, like, funding the eugenics movement, and how that moved to Nazi Germany, and how they got on all these forced sterilization laws in America, where they had these databases where they were, like, forcefully sterilizing people off the street. And after World War II, it became kind of they couldn't talk about it openly because of, like, like what Hitler did with that whole mindset. He literally, like, went to the logical end of eugenics, which is just like, okay, if they aren't good, might as well just kill them. Like that's what he did with the Jews and the Holocaust that took place. So after that, that thing really morphed into population control and, like, family planning and things like that, like soft eugenics, terming it in more rosy language.
Yeah.
So, and then now that's eventually morphed into the entire, like, Malthusian mindset of, like, the whole climate change movement. Like,
Population, too many
yeah,
people. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and those Malthusian kind of arguments as well that they use for that. Like, and they use it like every 5 years. There's not
Which
enough
they've been disproved,
response.
I'm pretty sure. The
Yeah, I
whole
mean, like,
arithmetic growth and yeah, I mean, it's bullshit.
yeah, there's a scientist that came up to counter Paul Ehrlich. So, I mean, Corbett's done a, like, great podcast on that also, with that whole debate, and,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
how Paul Ehrlich really lost when Simon came to bet against him, and he, like, Simon won every time. So that's, Simon's written a good book on that as well, which Corbett does talk about. So that, like, like, disproves scientifically the entire Malthusian mindset of, like, too many people and limited, like, exponential growth of people and limited growth of resources. That's just not true because of many different things that are discussed in that book. But I because of my understanding of the eugenics movement and
Hmm.
how they've always wanted to reduce the population, that's come up in many places before the COVID pandemic even started. And just looking at the way things are going right now, and the technologies that are coming up that are, like, basically weaponized towards attacking people, I do think there's a deep eugenics agenda to this, and it does involve, like, drastically reducing the global population. And I don't think this is about vaccine passports also necessarily. Of course, the vaccine passports are going to come, but this is the end game for me, as I understand it, is transhumanism and really,
Yeah, yeah,
like, merging man with machine and creating a global technocratic super state,
yeah.
which is a resource based economy where these technocrats really own all the resources. And we are deprived of all our, like, independent livelihoods and things, and we become dependent on them. And in that system, in the name of representing the public, like, they say we all own this, but it's like, we know, like, by understanding property rights, like, you can't have like multiple owners of something. You have to have, like, some guy who actually owns it. So in the name of this, propaganda of we'll all own everything, these basically, like, the billionaire class that's behind the World Economic Forum, and, like, all
Hmm.
these other top think tanks and globalist groups and all, they want to centralize all the resources. And it's not about money either. This is why it doesn't make any sense when you think about money, because they want to collapse the entire fiat monetary system,
Yeah.
which is exactly why David Rockefeller funded Zbigniew Brzezinski and the Trilateral Commission, and that whole side of things, because they wanted to, like, shift the economic system, and they wanted to position themselves in a way that they would benefit when the time came. So they understood very early on that this is not about, like, paper money. This is about having, like, who has more resources in the world.
Yeah.
That's what it really comes down to. So because of the push towards that, I think that, like, the ultimate end game is really reducing the population to such an extent where people can't rebel, and, like, really changing people from inside through technology eventually, which is something that's constantly developing. So at this phase, we are seeing vaccine passports roll out, but eventually it's going to become like microneedle patches going into the skin and things like hydrogel
And
going
people
inside the
think
body.
this is crazy conspiracy, sci-fi, Star Trek
I
stuff.
I know I know scientists in my own city that are working on this right now, and I
Like
know
these
I
things
yeah,
exist,
yeah.
and
I mean, like, you can trace it. Like, they're openly talking about, like, quantum patches and, like,
yeah.
microneedle arrays that are going to be going into the skin, and the vaccine delivery system is going to be changed, and it's going to leave a barcode on your skin that they can scan and pick up. So I mean, this is such every year's predictive programming. So last year, when I was going out and protesting, I was saying that the masks are just to program you, so the mask will get replaced by the vaccine. So it's like no mask, no entry into a store. It's going to become no vaccine, no entry. And right now, they are, like, in India itself, they're asking people to show their vaccine certificates to open their shops, to go to parks. So it's already got really bad. I mean, out here, and we're pushing back against this. Like, we have lawyers working with us, and we're going to send legal notices to, like,
Yeah, tell me about
government.
those lawyers you met yesterday. What is happening with that?
Yeah, so that the lawyer that we met, Dipali, she actually interviewed Pia Kori and, like, a
Okay.
couple of the people who were involved in the ivermectin thing, and she's become a public figure abroad. Like, she's getting a lot of input from doctors abroad who are really, like, pushing ivermectin and natural therapies and all, because it came all in the media. Like, they basically sent a legal notice to Soumya Swaminathan at the
Hmm.
WHO for spreading misinformation against ivermectin. and
That
like
feels
it
good.
works
That
because
feels good to
and
throw
Soumya,
it back at them.
yeah, and she deleted her tweets. Like this is the chief scientist at WHO. Instead of like responding back, she actually covered up like what she said. So yeah, so because of that success, like she's been reaching like being reached out to by a lot of these people, and it was a real pleasure meeting her because I'm going to have her on the show next week. Also, I'm going to be doing an interview with them.
Nice.
But she's right in my city, and they understand the whole deal, man. Like they're really top criminal lawyers out here. They're head of the Indian Bar Association, and it's a pleasure to have like connected with them because they want to like go full hard and like
Yeah.
criminally prosecute these people and attach their properties and hold them accountable for what they've done. So we have that kind of stuff taking place. We already in touch with like top Supreme Court lawyers in the country who already filed public interest litigation. So that's going to be going to court next month. So we have a lot of like like I personally have worked with a lot of these people in getting the whole legal effort going. So that is something that's taking place, but I don't put all my eggs in that basket. Like that can go on, and we'll see what happens or doesn't happen with that. But we're working a lot on the ground also to like organize people to form decentralized groups where counter economic activity is happening, and we're supporting each other through different currencies and trading with each other, and like actually organizing on the ground. So we have that going on as well. We're trying to interact with politicians. We've got some success there. I personally know people in the police and military who watch my stuff and they agree with me. So it's like we're making inroads everywhere out here, and the resistance is growing. But at the same time, the tyranny is really expanding at an exponential rate also. So it's just a constant battle. That's like we're kind of taking steps and they're taking leaps. It's like that.
Yeah.
So that's what's taking place right now.
So how do you how would you say how do you feel about the near future, let's say, not long term, but like where things are heading, specifically in India? Are you
I was kind of
optimistic?
I was a little bit more pessimistic like last month because I thought that because of the way the vaccine certificates have been rolled out, so they've really made it strict. They've basically what they've done is they've integrated a barcode scanner into the government's website itself. So they're telling that like they basically made this public website publicly available, and they're telling people that if you want to verify someone's vaccine certificate, you use our website. Our website has a barcode scanner that's connected to the database, and then that will scan the certificate and tell you whether someone's actually got a vaccine or not according to their official
Yeah.
database. So if we could use our own barcode scanners, that like I could even think about, okay, someone could set up a fake website with a slightly different domain and basically like host the same details and all. But because they've done that, it makes it even more difficult. So I was really disappointed because of that, like because we wouldn't be able to get fake certificates and stuff. But honestly, like India is the land of like people take money to get things done. So like because I know that those alternatives exist and there are people like that now, I'm a little bit less concerned because I mean we can get a fake and kind of push our time for a year or two more until the needles come out, and that's when things will make but yeah, until then I think we have a good amount of time to still work on this. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people are getting disappointed because they're thinking that if someone's got vaccinated, like they're a lost cause. But I see more people taking interest in our material after getting vaccinated because someone around them has got injured or something like that. So I don't think the vaccines are already starting to mind control people or something that
Yeah.
like many people think about. But I think that we should not treat the vaccinated as of yet as the enemy. Like there are
No.
people who are brainwashed and
Yeah.
who really want to go for this because they bought into the propaganda, who can still be reasoned with, and like, who still change their mind if they kind of pursue it independently. There are some people who are just like solid gold hard stuck, like they will they will not change no matter what you tell them, and they have really strong beliefs on this, and they're almost like like solid gold asleep. Like I've
There's no
tried reasoning.
point even trying.
Yeah, I
There's no
know.
point. Yeah.
I have friends like that who've been like this for the last 5 6 years. Even though I've debated, and it's just a drain of energy. Like they're not willing to like be open to the possibility that this is going on. So they're never going to change that their mind. So those kind of people are never going to change. But I still feel that like a lot of people who have taken the vaccine, will still come on our side and eventually like see what's going on. So
Especially
that
as they realize that just by taking this, they don't really have their freedoms back. At least here, a lot of
yeah.
people are super mad that they got the vaccine to go on holiday. It's June now, it's warm, and the government still tells them you need to take 3 tests, you need to quarantine, you need to do this. And it's like, so I think a lot of people, there's going to be a reckoning with people who are mad
I
that
think
they,
I think when the first round of variants come out and these people have to get vaccinated again, that's when I think a lot of the penny will start to drop for Indians. Because right now, most of the Indians are under the impression that okay, we've taken this and now things are opening. So immediately after like this now the second wave thing has died down and things are opening. Like Delhi has opened up, Mumbai is opening up pretty much. Salons and like gyms and everything, like they started opening up out here. So because of that, people are thinking, okay, it's like, okay, now I have a vaccine certificate, and like people are asking for vaccine certificates in different places. So they're thinking that, okay, like it's given me my freedom back to some extent. Like I can go here and do this.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit. I see, like in this whole time that I've observed, I think India is like a couple months back from what's going on in the West. So, like this is why also when in November, December, a lot of European countries were in lockdown, and
Hmm.
that time we were like having a blast. Like everything was
Yeah, you
open
told
out
me you
here.
went to a couple of parties.
Yeah. So that's the time when the European countries were in lockdown and we were having a blast. But then, like as soon as you guys started opening up, we went into like we started our second wave. Now that we've got done with us, you guys started again. So it's kind of like it's happening at
Shifting around. Yeah.
yeah they're shifting, they're targeting different countries at different times. It just seemed to be like that from
Yeah,
what I've.
honestly. Yeah.
So
So I wanted to,
after you
yeah.
guys are done again, I think they will try to implement a third wave out here. They're already talking about a third wave, which is going to come in September, October. They've even given a timeline for that. So they just
Yeah, it's
proclaim it.
crazy.
There's no science needed. Nothing. It's just like the third wave is going to come and it's going to affect children. That's the propaganda now.
Yeah.
So that's what they want to get the children vaccinated. So they've started the vaccine trials for the children also, and all of that stuff is going on. So I think, yeah,
Criminals.
I mean the next round where people see that, okay, despite getting the vaccine, I still have my freedoms limited, and like I still need to get a booster, like sort of a year or 6 months from now or something. That's when we'll have more pennies start to drop. But I think like it's a battle, right? Like you have a time span in which like people can come onto your side and you can make a change. But once the control system really gets deeper and deeper in terms of its establishment, and like the digital prison they're setting up around us, it's going to become harder and harder as time passes to even push back. So I think the time, like right now, for the next year or two is really really ripe, and like we just need to make sure that we go all out in terms of doing our best in these 2 years or
In
so,
this
because
time,
after
yeah,
that,
we really need to
yeah,
use this time well. I want to ask
yeah.
you, you reminded me of something, digital prison. Are you familiar with Alison McDowell?
I am. Yes.
She-
I actually got her to. I'm setting up an interview between her and one of another journalist from here who I interviewed last year.
Nice, that's great. I actually had her on the podcast. She was my first guest a few weeks ago. We had a
Great.
really good discussion, and when you said digital prison, it reminded me of a lot of what she's talking about. I think she's the top researcher on this. I think
Yeah.
probably in the
Yeah.
world, because good luck. Well, I mean, by the time academics catch up on what's happening, we're all going to be locked up in digital
Yep.
geo fences. So, but yeah, I was just, if you didn't know, I was going to tell you, like, you should really check her out, because I think her
I have.
knowledge has helped me a lot to connect some things in my mind that didn't connect before. And the way she explains things is really, really great in terms of understanding really where we're headed. And in terms of transhumanism and this idea of humans as honestly slaves in of some sort. Like it's hard to use that word, especially in the context that we're in now, that, oh, if you talk about slavery, as I'm sure you know, but like I think really that's where we're headed. And
I
it's
totally agree with you, man. I followed her work for a while, and like yeah, she's done some great stuff.
yeah.
In this.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you, what is, because I saw one of your most recent posts, I think your most recent post on Instagram, this PHFI, and I was wondering if you could explain what that is, and I think it will help a lot of the audience understanding of what's happening once they understand this public-private structure that we're in, and how people like Bill Gates, which every time someone who listens to mainstream news hears about Bill Gates as some sort of bad person, they're like, oh no, Bill Gates, which reminds me of how, of course, as you know, John D. Rockefeller rebranded himself after his oil empire as this sort of friendly guy. And same thing happened with Bill. So, what is this PHFI? And do you think it has had an effect? Because I thought of this when you're talking about how they changed the reporting system for the vaccination damage. Is that in any way related, do you think, about the influence of this authority on the rest of public health in India? And what does it stand for, first of all? Because I forget now.
PHFI is the Public Health Foundation of India.
Okay.
If people want a detailed rundown on this, my article featured in Off Guardian and like DavidIke.com activist post, like it featured last year on the globalist takeover of India's public health system. That's the title of the interview that I did with a journalist who's been who was talking about PHFI in 2011, when
Okay.
like I was fast gold asleep. Like I woke up somewhere around 2015 or something. but he started like way before me. He's already a journalist who was working, for a business magazine and things like that. And he had a personal experience with the founder of the the guy who got this whole thing together, like this organization going. And he was like a henchman for Bill Gates at the time. His name was Rajat Gupta. So he basically broke the whole story. Like I had already, I mean, I didn't know about PHFI till I came across his work. I knew about Bill Gates' activities in India and how he'd been influencing things, for a couple of years, like going back into the 90s. And like, there's been a lot of globalist influence in India. I've done a lot of videos on this also in English about like how the Rockefellers and the Ford Foundation and all influenced our family planning program and actually had like targets for sterilization and things. So they've always had a very big influence, but somewhere around 2006, the effort really got institutionalized, and they had a public-private partnership in the health space, sit right inside the government of India. And ever since then, they've basically been, influencing and controlling public health policy. Many people from that organization are now sitting and directing the entire COVID strategy in India. Like many people from there are sitting in the COVID task force, which is telling the government what to do with respect to like the things that are happening. So of course, I mean, there's a big connection over there between this organization and what's going on. This organization to this day is receiving funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, Wellcome Trust, McKinsey, a lot of these, like, sort of
The usual
Vanderbilt University.
suspects.
Yeah, usual suspects, all of them. Like even the Diamond Trust of the Queen of England, they're getting funding from there as well. They're getting funding from a lot of vaccine manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, the usual suspects. And my work's basically like, I focus a lot on helping Indians to understand like how the structure really affects India, and like who are the players out here that really work with the globalists. So I know of people who are really big billionaires in India who sit in the founding board of the World Economic Forum. So you'll find people like Mukesh Ambani, who's a really big industrialist from here. He sits in the World Economic Forum founding board. You have many Indians that sit in the Trilateral Commission. You have many Indians that sit in the International Advisory Board of the Council on Foreign Relations. So it's honestly like many people are from here are involved in these think tanks and kind of groupings that basically are pushing the the great
Well,
reset.
as your president said, India is gonna play a big role in the new world
Yeah,
order,
he's
as he said
he's
it.
openly using things like New World Order in his speeches and all. So I mean, a prime minister's been a puppet for a really long
Yeah.
time. Even the guy that went before him was a member of the Club of Rome, and
Hmm.
even Modi's gone to many like World Economic Forum meetings and CFR meetings and all. So it's like, and I mean they have close connections. Like our current prime minister has very close connections to Henry Kissinger and all. So you'll find these people come up.
Conspiracies. I'm sure these people don't ever talk to each other. They're just all in their own little groups, and they don't even know each other.
Yeah,
Fucking
so
hell.
that's what PHFI is, man. Like so basically the Gates Foundation funded this and founded this. Like the Gates Foundation actually was involved in the setup of this body that sits inside the government. It's had all of India's top billionaires who work with the globalists on board. Like many of the billionaires that sit in PHFI actually sit in Bill Gates' Giving Pledge as well. So Bill Gates' Giving Pledge is basically like his initiative where he's bringing all these billionaires together from different parts of the globe, and he's making them pledge their wealth to the causes that the Giving Pledge supports. So all the usual things like vaccines and digital education and all the things that are like taking place right now. So many Indians are involved with Gates and Gates founded like bodies. Many scientists from here get funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. So there's a university in the south out here that has produced many people that have an influence in public health in India. They get a lot of funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. The Rockefeller Foundation has had a huge history in India. Like if you study going all the way back to the 50s, they've been involved in the Green Revolution, even the entire
Oh, I didn't know
GMO.
about this. Okay.
Yeah. So they've been here ever since the British left, technically. I mean, the Rockefellers were behind the East India Company also to a certain extent. So they never left. Like they just continued in different names. But they were behind the like covertly, like forcefully pushing sterilizations onto people. The states had targets for actually achieving sterilization, and this is after like the World War happened, like World War II happened, right? So Indians were being forced to be sterilized. The Rockefellers were behind the public health kind of infrastructure set up in India. So since the beginning, if you go to the Rockefeller Foundation's YouTube channel and you see like the Rockefeller Foundation in India, you can see a timeline of like, okay, we started this, we funded one of the biggest health universities, we funded the malaria program, we did this, we did that, we were involved in AIDS research. So, they've always constantly been involved through the decades. The Rockefeller Foundation also funded an Indian scientist that is working on a fertility regulating vaccine. So if you see like the Rockefeller Foundation like was publishing papers like in their own sort of writings, about developing a fertility regulating vaccine. So there's one paper from the 70s that they published, that they started funding an Indian scientist, and he's going to work on this. Then in the 1990s, the WHO had a task force for like vaccines for fertility regulation, and they were basically saying that we have a vaccine candidate that can work to like reduce people's fertility and basically make them infertile. So the Rockefeller Foundation directly funded a scientist out here. His name was Dr. Talwar, and the trials for this just started in 2018. So they're already working, and they already like have started trials out here on a fertility controlling vaccine. So that way they've been involved all over the place, and it's no surprise that they're continuing to fund PHFI to this day. And PHFI is like, it's like the deep state of India to some extent, because like a lot of the billionaires that work with these globalists, they're all sitting there in the board, and they're involved in the management. PHFI really was instrumental in training a lot of workers who basically go into the deepest pockets of Indian villages and vaccinate people.
Hmm.
So they were involved in training a lot of those people. They were involved, basically in controlling the National Health Mission, which again has an influence on the vaccine program and the public health system. So a lot of their bureaucrats have been involved in top policy making, places in India. A lot of people from government actually sit in the PHFI, so it's like a revolving door between
Yeah, exactly.
people. And like public-private partnerships sound innocuous, but if you see the definition of fascism is basically the merger of
Yeah.
corporate and state power, right? So I mean that's literally what's happening. You have like the biggest billionaires collaborating with state actors, and they're together like synergizing their power and influence to push their agendas onto us. So yeah, that's basically what PHFI is.
Yeah.
And if you study, like if you see that the interview I did with Kapil Bajaj, it really goes into detail of how it was founded, the controversy surrounding it, what some financial scams that have taken place inside the PHFI, and many things about that. Yeah, but it is to this day, one of like the president of PHFI, this guy called Srinath Reddy, he was involved with IHME. So he was the direct, like he was sitting in the founding board of IHME, which is what the organization that produced the models when this whole thing started, like the Institute for
Oh,
Health
okay.
Metrics and Evaluation.
In
Yeah, so
India specifically.
yeah, no, I'm saying that the president of the PHFI
Okay.
was involved in the founding board of IHME. So he had and IHME was totally funded by the Gates Foundation.
Okay.
So he's been involved in that, and like these people kind of rotate all around. So if you see
Yeah.
people like a lot of the scientists in India, like there's a scientist called Gagandeep Kang. She goes and works in CEPI. CEPI was created by the Gates Foundation in like some, I think, 2016 or 2017, and they had a specific program for developing vaccines for like pathogen X, like this new
Yeah.
pathogen
Yeah.
that's going to come up suddenly. So you have a lot of people from India working with these groups. It's just that the spotlight hasn't been put on them, and that's what I've been trying to do through my work. I openly call these people out, and no one's basically like, until I started this and I got the journalists involved, like people didn't even know like the names, and the people who are directly working with these globalists to directly push their agendas in India, and that cuts into all the things like climate change policy, population reduction, the vaccination schedule, the genetically modified seeds. Like it just cuts through everything once you see how these people are collaborating, and then what things are coming out through the NGOs, through their corporations. Like they're all basically pushing this technocratic agenda. A lot of Indians also, like who are billionaires and who have like people under them, they're going and attending meetings of the Trilateral Commission, and the Trilateral Commission is like very centrally involved in the entire technocratic
Yeah.
agenda that's being pushed right now. So I mean, there's a lot of links to go for. Like, if you start to investigate, you'll start finding actual names and people who, I mean, I don't know if they're knowingly pushing this or they've been told that what they're doing is to save the world, and like,
I think a
the
lot of
different.
people believe they're doing good things, to be honest. I don't
Exactly,
see,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't see this as a
Very
good,
few of them
yeah.
actually understand like that they're doing something like actually for control. But a lot of these people have their minds molded by like really high level propaganda. So like this
Yeah.
is that's like propaganda engineered for the elite class, like to mold their minds in a way. So that's very sophisticated. Like if
Oh,
you
that's
see the
interesting.
meet,
I never thought of it that way.
yeah, yeah. So a lot of the meetings that take place at the World Economic Forum and all, they talk about the agenda, but they really spin it in a very like rosy and technical
So it's
way
like they're
where
convincing themselves almost that what they're doing is for the good of the planet and
yeah,
humanity.
lot of these people believe that we need centralization of power because these people can't run themselves,
Yeah.
and if there's a global authority, then it'll reduce the wars, and it'll like we'll be able to solve these problems better, like climate change. And things like that. So yeah, a lot of them have convinced themselves, or they've been convinced by people who've kind of coached them and molded them to come into, like, these people are approached, right? They just don't magically become part of the networks. Like they're combed, they're spotted, they're targeted to kind of, okay, come and attend this meeting. They make them feel like they're important. Okay, you come and attend this kind of meeting at the CFR where all these people are sitting, and then accordingly the culture is set in a way where they spin these narratives. It's all about the narrative, right? So they'll always spin the narrative, and then it's like people just kind of adopt that, and like adopt that as a worldview, and then they go back into the countries and push the same thing once they've been indoctrinated. So these people are subjected to really high level propaganda, which of course we can break down, and like a lot of people like James Corbett and many fantastic researchers are doing work in breaking that down. But the propaganda for the masses is very like base level. Like that's that's very easy to break down. But then they have like special propaganda catered just for the managerial class, like these people who kind of
That's
go and
very
push these.
interesting. Yeah, I never thought of it that way. Yeah, and it has to be because I mean, for some of these people, you really have to be blind not to see the consequences ultimately of what they're doing. And again, it's not that they're evil. Or I think a few psychopaths for sure,
Yeah,
somewhere up there there are. But the vast majority, as you said, I think they've been propagandized to think, we need to do it for the little people. That only we have the knowledge, the expertise, and it's again the technocratic sort of basic
it's like a very
point.
I
Yeah,
mean, there's
paternalistic. Just you
God
can't take care of
complex.
yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Like they think they know everything, and that these plebs can't figure it out because they've never gone through academia and come to where we are. So we
Yeah.
have to help them. We have the knowledge to help them, and we'll
Yeah.
take care of them.
Ah. Anyway, Johan, I'm gonna have to go soon because we started late and I have a few things
Yeah,
I need to
I
do
have an
later.
interview in 10 minutes as well.
Perfect. So good timing. I think this was honestly a great discussion. We touched on a lot of things, but I think we did it well, as you, of course, because you did most of the discussing. I think I really enjoyed and I learned a lot. And thanks again so much for coming on. And just for people to know, where can we follow your work the most? Where are you most active? And do you have any projects coming up or anything we should know about?
Yeah, I'm working on a documentary exposing Gates's activities in India. So I'm working on that for quite some time. But honestly, I got caught up in a lot of other stuff, so I've not been able to finish that. But I think people can expect that in a month or so. Like I've got the research ready for that, and we know a lot of stuff now. So that's very important for Indians and the world to know in general as to how the globalist forces are influencing India. So I'm working on that. We have a lot of legal action coming up, so I think there's going to be more noise about this once the next month kicks in, because that's when a lot of things are going to start. We're working on joining the demonstration thing on 24th. So we're working on organizing a big protest in my city, where we at least want 1,000 people to show up, at least, hopefully more than that. So that work's going on. So that should be something that, like, I really look forward to making that happen. So a lot of my energy is focused over there as well. And in general, yeah, I mean, my Instagram account, Anarchy for Freedom, is where I'm active, and my YouTube channel is where I'm very active as well. But the YouTube channel, I have a lot of content that's done in Hindi, so it's like. But I do some interviews in English also. If
Okay.
I'm
Oh, yes. Yeah.
especially if I'm having someone from abroad, or if someone in the country doesn't know English, then I'll do it. But then mostly I'm trying to wake up the Indian audience. So most of my content is done in Hindi for that
No, as
reason.
you should. I think that's right completely. Perfect. Thank you so much again. And hopefully we can do it again maybe in a few months. We'll see where things
Sure thing,
are. We
sure
can
thing.
do an update.
Yeah,
All
it was a
right,
pleasure
man.
chatting. Thanks, Nico.
Cheers, man. See you.
Bye.